That ending to me felt very anticlimactic.
I
They they kept hinting at something a lot more sinister, and then it just ended up being a crazy dude just kind of hiding out in a cave.
Yeah, I figured you'd feel that way once it turned that way.
Hmm.
We actually on the current game we're working on, we've been talking about so many different aspects of plot, and basically several times if I've ever kind of pitched something close to this, Jason has shot it down, and rightfully so, because he's been like, no, it just feels anticlimactic, and I'm like, yeah. So it's just kind of funny. I'm like, oh, Jason's gonna be disappointed.
It's okay, so if the whole thing was about Ned and Brian, I feel like they could have done more things that actually had to do with it. Like, I don't get why his place was broken into, the typewriter was thrown out, like there was like a creepy shadow dude. I don't know, like that it just seemed to be misleading, which was maybe the point, but
Y- yeah,
I think if you
basically.
like
Oh,
modern day storytelling has a very fluid, consistent, or at least the stuff that we think that we like has a very consistent and fluid thread, right? So there's that one continuous thread. Here, we didn't have any of that. It was like a Rube Goldberg machine. It was one thing leading to the other, and at the end, we don't even remember what happened at the beginning. But it's like real life as
yeah.
opposed to a written story, right? So real life is not all that exciting most of the time. So it's much harder to make something that is just one thing leads to the other feel good to us after being spoiled with very consistent storylines and in our films and in our television shows. I personally found it to be a divergent storytelling mechanism that I enjoyed because it's not standard. It's one thing leads to the other instead of everything is exactly the way that I expected it because this is how stories are told. You know what I mean? And so for me, it was just a really interesting 5 or 6 hours that I played at the original time. I think it might have been 10, but it was interesting because and to me interesting just means I was enjoying it the whole time, even the ending when I found this crazy dude in his little basement that he made that didn't, like, I could understand that if you're out in the middle of the wilderness and someone lost his kid and he's been sitting out there forever, he'd conjure up all kinds of craziness. And so that makes sense. It was one thing led to the other, and we just happened to get tangled up into this sort of web that didn't tie everything together. And I think that's where the failing is for most people, is that it's not tied together. But for me, I really enjoyed that aspect of it because I wasn't expecting a consistent story thread, right? I didn't go into it expecting anything. All I all I got when I was playing was that, that melancholy feel. This I also played it. When I was playing this, I wasn't really feeling all that happy about my marriage, and so
Hmm.
it was really hurtful what was going on and confusing and frustrating and like all these conflicting ideas, and so this life ends up in a place where you don't necessarily expect it, and I think that this hit that very well for me, at least.
Malekith has also commented of whatever happened to Dave and Ron, and who were the other two people he was tracking, which maybe those were Dave and Ron, since we don't have a timeline for that. I'm
Mm-hmm.
wondering, though we don't know what happened to Dave and Ron, but those would be the other two.
Hmm.
Um,
And there
and
were multiple pictures at the end. There was it wasn't just of what's his name, Brian and Dan. I don't know his name.
Ned,
Anyway,
Ned.
There you go. So it wasn't just them in the final pictures. There was, and it wasn't a selfie either. At least I don't. Maybe it was a selfie.
Wait, it was Henry, and then it was then Henry, then Ned, then Brian, and then Brian and Ned. I thought.
There was one more image in there. Oh, that was the one where it was just a bad image. Okay. Yeah. Someone had their finger over the lens.
To comment a little bit more on your point, I feel like that opinion is completely valid, but I think the thing that makes it a bit weird for me is if you're going for like this, like one thing leads to another, like it just plays out like life. I feel like what makes that weird is how much mystery and how much buildup happened at the end. Like, I almost feel like if you're going down that route, then it needs to be a bit more boring, if that makes any sense. Like, especially with the fire burning so hard at the end, like there's really a lot of buildup there, and so that's why that kind of like slice of life seems a bit weird in that situation. And then alternatively, if you really want to go with the mystery and the buildup, then having this like day-to-day where nothing connects just seems weird, like I was saying before. So I think it's just the inconsistency of like throwing those two things together, which kind of I don't know, didn't really work for me.
Do you think now at this point that the opening dialogue should have been omitted?
Yes.
Yeah. Me too.
I still think that could be like thrown in here and there, but
as like little spice instead of the main point.
Yeah, I feel like aside from like knowing what happened to your wife, none of that stuff really like got brought up again.
I mean,
I guess like his wife drinking.
Mayhem.
I guess that's it. The fact that mayhem.
So much of that could have been brought across in the dialogue and in the little hints, like the wedding ring, the photo. I mean, one of the mysteries would have been us figuring out who Henry was along the way and why he was there. So telling us all that at the beginning, it does give us more sympathy to him in his situation. But I don't think that was necessary, because by day two we had already talked about his wife and the seriousness of it, and we kind of got to the same place. So yeah, the opening text, while engaging, Malika says that the writing at the beginning and the rest feels like two separate games to me. It was very out of place. I think
definitely.
I think that it wanted to do two different things. Like, if you stripped away the conspiracy angle, like with the whole government thing, like if you took that out and you took away any sense where we started to feel like there was conspiracy going on, it like bumped up the scope of the plot like an entire magnitude. It's not just like I'm out here, there's some crazy, because I mean originally there's some crazy dude in the forest, right?
Yeah.
And we could have stuck with that and been like, who's the crazy dude in the forest? But then it's like there's conspiracy, because the thing he said is that they know more about us than what we've talked about.
Yeah.
So there's things in there that still, like, just explaining it away by, oh yeah, it was just all Ned. It's like, okay, it's possible, but it just feels like, is it?
Well, I think because, another thing is that, that there was 65 days, or I don't remember the number, but 76 or whatever it is. Anyway, so there was that much time. So he alluded towards the end when we were talking, or when he was on the tape. He was basically alluding that there was a long period of time, and he was getting to know him. So he could have found out all that information through that. But then there's that one time when Henry says, "We didn't even talk about that. How does he know that?" So
yeah. That's what I'm referring to, because Ned's just some crazy dude in the middle of nowhere in 1988 or 89.
Yeah.
So, like, how would he know something? Like, where would he get that information?
Mhm.
I don't know. There's also... No, I guess that doesn't really matter.
There are
because,
holes, and as Malekith is saying, unanswered questions.
Yeah. But basically, he's saying that the writing feels different. But then again, there were like 5 writers on this game, so there's that.
I think that the whole reason why they did that is sort of a hook, because it was very emotionally engaging, and they probably couldn't find a way to make the opening draw you in so people got bored quickly, and so having an emotional investment in the main character kept us going until we were weaned off of that and into the whole thing with Delilah and being in the middle of nowhere and then this random guy showing up. You know, so I think they were just trying to hook us, but I think they could have done it a different way.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like in other games, or even in movies or stories, it's like, you know, if he had a plane ticket to Australia and, like, in his personal possession, I mean, that would right away be like, oh, he's got a plane ticket. Is he going somewhere? What's going on? You know? I mean, I feel like, again, by day 2, we'd hit the key points, and we could have gone further into that. So... Yeah, I mean, but I'm not gonna... Overall, like, the experience, what they're going for is, you know, as much as I can complain about maybe some plot elements, you know, I'm not satisfied by the solution to a puzzle was Crazy Guy, because I kind of feel like Crazy Guy can always be the solution to a puzzle. Yeah. So, so when Jason has shot down my leanings towards that, it's like, yeah, I don't like Crazy Guy's the solution, because it's just this panacea. So I'm not a huge fan of that. But the thing is, it also just depends on what that puzzle is. Like, if we didn't have a whole conspiracy angle, and if Ned didn't have, like, we still, like, his motivations were dubious at best. It's just like, what did Ned really want? And I mean, you don't need to have an answer, I guess, necessarily, but jumping to the conclusion that he killed his son doesn't seem all that likely. But but it seemed like Henry and Delilah were quick to, like, he killed him. Like, all right, accidents happen. I mean, the accident seems more of again, another contrivance just for things to move forward. But regardless, putting some beef with the plot aside, you've got a gorgeous game that is masterfully directed. They definitely suck you in with the elements. Like, you might not get the payoff, but they're really good at sucking you in. So,
there's a lot of the journey was definitely better than the destination.
Yeah.
Yes, and that tends to be the case with when you do mystery conspiracy type stuff. You know, first season of Lost, great. Second, and on, like, why?
Because you have to reveal something at some point.
Yeah, they can't all be The Wire.
Yeah. Oh man, that was so good.
So yeah,
I do like how we never once saw Delilah, and yet we have this picture of who she is, at least from our little snippets of time. But there's that interaction that we already know that there's this person called Delilah, and we can say that her name is Delilah, and there's something of substance there, but we've never seen her, and there's still that mystery. And so I do think that they paid that off. I think that was a really good ending for that dynamic. But then they just left a bunch of things unanswered, and they left things behind in the plot. They just completely disregarded them after a while, you know, where it was set up really strong and then it was gone.
And in that alternate ending, they also leave Henry.
Yeah.
And I'm okay with them leaving a lot of things unanswered that don't necessarily like. I mean, that just has like it's a richer world. Like Henry himself doesn't get to know what happened to every single person that was out here and all that. So that that to me isn't really too much of a problem. I mean, it's okay. But the mechanics of the game, the not dying, the compelling interactive narrative, many kudos to what they did here.
There's a lot of great things.
It would be so interesting though. Like I would rarely say like that I'd want to chat with the person or with the designers, but it's just like, I want to talk to them about like, so what ended up happening, Was it something with the publisher where you're like, the publisher's like, we need something to suck them in right away. It's like, how about some text? Yeah, that's great.
Yep. Like, and that happens a lot.
Yeah. So I'd be curious to hear some commentary on that. And also just the writing process of like, I feel like it wouldn't have been as exciting if they would have left out the conspiracy angle. But I also feel like I wouldn't feel as disappointed. So it's like it wouldn't have raised as high to a disappointment level. So I feel like I'd be more satisfied ultimately if I didn't feel like I kind of was tricked a little bit one way. And especially too because I feel like a few of the things they used, like things like manipulation level, like at what point was why is that even a thing on a note? Like that didn't really come into play. And that doesn't fit the MO for Ned either. And I actually thought they were going to kind of put in something to do with long-range radio bouncing, since that was what Brian had introduced. So I was almost expecting some sort of twist later that we were thinking we were talking to Delilah, but she wasn't actually there anymore because of something Ned had set up. I don't know. But again, it had me thinking about so much bigger things.
That sounds
because of the conspiracy angle. You can go ahead.
I was just saying that sounds really cool. It sounds like it would be a good element to add to the already rich world, and then help us to sort of have a satisfying end. I don't know.
Malekith also says that he's curious what happened with Julia. And that is another thing, like, that even with our options, like, in a sense, the first two characters we're introduced to are Henry and Julia. And even if Henry himself is going to move on, like, I don't know that the audience necessarily is on board with that. Like, we're able to cling to Julia much better than Henry is, because Henry is facing like this day-to-day difficulty that we're not really in the shoes of.
Yes.
So I can step out and say like, oh yeah, I get like that's really rough, and we can kind of assume that, but as an audience member, we still want to know what happens to Julia, and so that would be nice, but the game does have a kind of a vagueness and an abruptness, so it's not necessarily unsurprising for it to just be like, and that's that.
Yeah.
And I guess, ultimately it's up to us with the arbitrary choice at the end, or we just pick, does Henry, we get to imagine our own ending, like does Henry go after Julia, or do we accidentally say, nah, I'm moving on?
Yeah.
Oops. Sorry, Julia. We pressed the wrong button.
Hey, man. Rube Goldberg. One thing leads to another. It was an accident, but it affected.
I'm actually more surprised that the alternate ending didn't, like, show Henry meeting up with Delilah or something.
Yeah.
And I mean...
I agree.
I don't feel like that.
Or getting back to the red truck that he had at the beginning.
Yeah.
I feel like that's just like a funny that the developers put in. Like, haha, you can be left. It's not like this is an alternate timeline,
What are the special features? by the way, that menu mentions on the title screen.
Let's check it out. Hey.
Oh, commentary.
Oh,
maybe they'll say
round.
something about the intro.
do we want to start a audio tour? At least to check out the intro?
Probably not. Maybe for the intro they'll say
Just for the-
something.
Wanna do it?
Let's do it. Yeah,
See, this is where I was hoping we'd be back, and there'd be like this powwow, this like maybe a campfire and a teepee, and they were just powwowing, like she said, that meeting.
it was also a pretty nice stylistic choice that they did for us, the early concept and storyboards.
Oh, that's cool. Oh, is the commentary just like thrown in here? Like little images and notes everywhere? No, because it was an audio tour. So that wouldn't make sense.
Oh, do you have to pick up the audio headset?
Where? Oh, I said, yeah. Nice.
Hi, I'm Sean Vanneman. I wrote
Okay.
100% of this game.
Hey, I'm Jake Rodkin. I did a lot of level design, UI design, and worked with everyone on the story for Firewatch.
The game has this weird structure that Chris and I talk about in another tape. This is the first thing I wrote, was this opening of the game that jumps between Henry's life and the trip out to the woods. And I used a little product called Twine to do that, which you can download and use. It's just a very simple choose your own adventure tool. The simplest way to program a video game that one can then share with friends and play.
I think we were worried that the team would sort of perceive Henry as a blank slate, as sort of a generic game player protagonist, and we wanted to make sure, or we wanted to get in everyone's mindset, you're playing as a specific guy with a specific life.
Yeah, there's a reason when you play video games that a lot of your protagonists have amnesia, because it's really difficult when you're driving a character around who knows things about their life, or his or her life, that you, who you ostensibly are that person, don't know. So yeah, we kept trying to write an opening of the game that happened sort of like weeks into Henry's experience, and then quickly realized that it was like, well, why would he not be able to say X? Well, because his relationship with his wife is Y. So, but the player doesn't know that. Yeah. And this was the quickest way to get everybody on board, was to just take the thing that I wrote that answered the question, I think, for Jane and you at the beginning, which was like, who is Henry? And I would write these character profiles that were really bad. And then I went, what if I just let you play a thing, and then you can figure out who he is? And we held on to that until we had the idea to put into the game.
It means that when you're playing Firewatch and Henry and Delilah start talking about Henry's wife, you don't have to learn it through his dialogue, because you made the choices that brought him where he is today.
But I wanted to learn it through his dialogue. That would have been
I was
better.
okay with
Yeah.
that. I mean, even if he was on the truck, like driving up, he's got the picture of his wife. I mean, I feel like there's so many like little details that, that you could have just put on in there.
Yeah,
Well, that was
they
interesting.
They kind of made it seem like you either, at the beginning of the game, you know everything or you know nothing, and there's no other choice in between that to do.
Yeah. Huh.
And it's funny because they're so good at doing what they do of like building character and richness through small cues and things like that. So it's really funny where it's just like, clearly you guys know what you're doing, but maybe they just felt like they needed more of it, or they got kind of stuck on that particular idea since it was there from the beginning, and they never really thought to go back and say, yeah, but do we need it?
So is there anything that we wanted to talk about before we close this out?
Other than 4 non-blondes?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Other than 4 non-ones.
Do we want to finish through the intro here, or do we feel that our answers or questions have been answered?
Yeah, I don't think they're gonna talk about it anymore.
Yeah, we got our answer. It started off with a Twine thing, and
And it got
and
left
then went
in.
to wine.
Yep. So, anyway, there's I feel like there's a little bit of some writing cheats, but other than that, it was super great.
I
It was
agree.
quite enjoyable throughout.
Yeah. Even going through it right now, I could play through it again.
They do a good job of replayability with all the different dialogue branching options that you could have with Delilah.
Yeah.
And it was a cool design choice to limit that you only got to meet one person at the end of the game, and even then, that person's in a suit. So, they were able to kind of maintain that stylistic choice.
Of like not having any 3D models.
Well, the isolationists of being kind of alone.
Yeah.
Oh, you put her in a home?
Yes.
That was interesting. And how did that go?
I don't know. I wasn't really reading it. I was just choosing the opposite, because if I play this again without you guys, I'll at least know.
I'm Nels Anderson, and I was a designer and gameplay programmer on Firewatch.
I am Jane Ng, and I worked on the 3D environment art in Firewatch.
So,
that's why it's beautiful. All right.
Okay. So, I think that's it. We got great game.
Developers, good job. You made an incredible game.
Yep.
We would hope to make games similar to this. This is, I think, kind of an ideal for us as designers as well, of just being able to tell a compelling story with interactivity, and that's and no crummy like, oh, I died, or oh, I got to do this or that. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
thank you guys for that.